Hello, welcome back. You have made it almost 40 chapters into Genesis. When we're done with this video, you will have studied the first 40 chapters. That's huge. Today, we're going to cover a story that you've probably heard a number of times, but I believe today you're going to hear it in a way you've never heard it before because we don't actually read the story, we just hear it from somebody else. So we're going to jump right in. We're going to cover 39 and 40 because they're fairly short chapters, but also there's not a whole lot of information in there, but there is some vital information in there. So we really want to pay attention to what we're doing here. So let's jump into Genesis chapter 39. Like, share, comment, you know the drill, do all of it. We're at like over 2,000 views. This is insane. Thank you, thank you, thank you for sharing this with everybody. This has been just an amazing thing to watch God work, believe me. But you didn't come to hear me, you came to hear God. So let's go. Chapter 39, the complete Jewish Bible. Joseph, which is Joseph, was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer in Pharaoh and an officer of Pharaoh's, we don't edit here, and captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmael who had brought him there. Adonai was with Joseph, and he became wealthy while he was in the household of his master, the Egyptian. His master saw how Adonai was with him, that Adonai prospered everything he did. Joseph pleased him as he served him, and his master appointed him manager of his household. He entrusted all his possessions to Joseph. From the time he appointed him manager of his household and all his possessions, Adonai blessed the Egyptian's household for Joseph's sake. Adonai's blessing was all he owned, whether in the house or in the field. So he left all his possessions in Joseph's care, and because he had him, he paid him no attention to his affairs except for the food he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome as well. In time, the day came when his master's wife took a look at Joseph and said, "Sleep with me." But he refused, saying to his master's wife, "Look, because my master has me, he doesn't know what's going on in his house. He has put all his possessions in my charge. In this house, I am his equal. He hasn't withheld anything from me except yourself, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" But she kept pressing him day after day. Nevertheless, he didn't listen to her. He refused to sleep with her or even be with her. However, one day when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men living in the house was there indoors, she grabbed him by his robe and said, "Sleep with me." But he fled, leaving his robe in her hand. It's amazing how a robe has gotten him in so much trouble. I just realized that. But uh, he left his robe in her hand and had escaped. She called the men of the house and said to them, "Look at this. My husband brought a Hebrew to make fools of us. He came in and wanted to sleep with me, but I yelled out loudly. When he heard me yelling like that, he left his robe with me and ran out." She put the robe aside until his master came home. And then she said to him, "This Hebrew slave you brought us came in to make a fool of me, but when I yelled out, he left his robe with me and fled outside." When his master heard what his wife said, as she showed him, "Here's what your slave did to me," he became furious. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, in the place where the king's prisoners were kept, and there he was in the prison. But Adonai was with Joseph, showing him grace and giving him favor in the sight of the prison warden. The prison warden made Joseph supervisor of all the prisoners in the prison, so that whatever they did there, he was in charge of it. The prison warden paid no attention to anything Joseph did, because Adonai was with him, and whatever he did, Adonai prospered. So Potiphar's an Egyptian. Remember, his brothers sold him to some traders, and the traders took him down to Egypt. But at this time, Egypt was conquered by non-Egyptians. This is really vital to understand what all happened with the Pharaoh and the things that are about to happen. Make way more sense when you understand these are not Egyptians in charge of Egypt at the time. They were actually attacked by Bedouins, which are kind of like, what do you call it? the people that just kind of want gypsies and whatever you call that thing that where they just wander around. Bedouins live in tents in the desert. We wanted to stay in some Bedouin tents last time we were in Israel, and one member of our party made a big deal about it, kind of cried like a baby about it, so we didn't do it. But next time I'm in Israel, I'm definitely going to do it. But these guys were from Arabia and Syria. They wanted what Egypt had. They went there to take what they had. Now, these are actual Semite rulers. So you may have heard the term anti Semite, and that means basically anti Jewish, anti Israel. They are all Semites. And these are part of the Hebrew people. The Semites are sons of Shem. So they're all related, cousins of Israel, I guess you would say. They sat on the throne of Egypt. So they were actual Semites, Hebrews in a sense, in a general sense. So Joseph was really one of them. He was a cousin, he was a family member. I'm loosely interpreting that. So if you have like a PhD in Genesis or Egyptian history, you probably hate me right now and you're screaming into your phone or something. But for those of you who don't, what I just said is kind of true, but it's way more complicated than that. But trust me, those facts will help get you through what we're about to do. So again, the Egyptians, they did not record defeats. So if I'm the one keeping the records, I'm not going to record the bad things, is basically the philosophy there. So what we know about this particular time period is from private Egyptian citizens who kept records of certain things that happened. So with Semites in control, it explains why Moses mentions that Potiphar was an Egyptian. See, that's important. It also explains why the Pharaoh didn't hesitate giving Joseph authority, because he was in the family, so to speak. The fact that the Semites were in power was divine providence. I mean, imagine this, a whole country full of people, and God put your family members in charge of it during the period that you would be there, even you didn't even know you would be there. That's divine providence. There's no other way to explain that. But she says this Hebrew was brought in to make fools out of our household. So this shows the hatred the Egyptians had for Semites. Because remember, she's not a Semite. Potiphar and his wife were Egyptians. They were working for the Semites, the rulers, the current rulers. So she didn't like Semites. He was being kept in the home of the prison guard, which was basically a dungeon or a basement. They were usually in the main home, so prisoners didn't escape because they were right there by the front door. So understanding these are Semites in charge of Egypt, and you may or may not have known that, but these were not Egyptians. That will change how you see some of these stories we're going to have coming up, especially when they get ready to leave. So let's jump into chapter 40, and we will read that in the New Living Translation, because I think it's a little easier to understand, and the translation's not that different. So, sometime later, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker offended their royal master. Pharaoh became angry with these two officials and put them in prison where Joseph was, in the palace of the captain of the guard. They remained in prison for quite some time, and the captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, who looked after them. One of the reasons they kept them there is because they didn't build prisons. They just basically dug a hole and put them in there. It was quite cost effective. So while they were in prison, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker each had a dream one night, and each dream had its own meaning. When Joseph saw them the next morning, he noticed that they both looked upset. "Why do you look so worried today?" he asked them, and they replied, "We both had dreams last night, but no one can tell us what they mean." "Interpreting dreams is God's business," Joseph replied. "Go ahead and tell me your dreams." He's got a little history with interpreting dreams here. So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream first. "In my dream," he said, "I saw a grapevine in front of me. The vine had 3 branches that began to bud and blossom, and soon it produced clusters of ripe grapes. I was holding Pharaoh's wine cup in my hand, so I took a cluster of grapes and squeezed the juice into the cup. Then I placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. This was what the dream means, Joseph said. The 3 branches represent 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift you up and restore you to your position as his chief cupbearer. And please remember me and do me a favor when things go well for you. Mention me to Pharaoh so that he might let me out of this place. For I was kidnapped from my homeland, the land of the Hebrews, and now I'm here in prison, but I did nothing to deserve it. When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given the first dream such a positive interpretation, he said to Joseph, I had a dream too. In my dream, there were 3 baskets of white pastries stacked on my head. The top basket contained all kinds of pastries for Pharaoh, but the birds came and ate them from the basket on my head. This is what the dream means, Joseph told them. The 3 baskets also represent 3 days. 3 days from now, Pharaoh will lift you up and impale your body on a pole. Wow, thanks for that. The birds will come and peck away at your flesh. Pharaoh's birthday came 3 days later, and he prepared a banquet for all his officials and staff. He summoned his chief cupbearer and chief baker to join the other officials. He then restored the chief cupbearer to his former position so that he could again hand Pharaoh his cup. But Pharaoh impaled the chief baker just as Joseph had predicted when he interpreted his dream. Pharaoh's cupbearer, however, forgot all about Joseph, never giving him another thought. Appreciate that one too. So about 11 years have passed, and Joseph is about 28 years old. And it's interesting because we still kind of see this young guy that, not that 28 is not young, but that he just got to Potiphar's house and all this stuff just happened like within days, especially when you read the Bible like chapter after chapter. But actually, about 11 years have gone by, and he's just kind of hanging out in prison. And so I don't know why I'm laughing. That is obviously not funny, but it is divine providence, and we're going to see how that is. So Pharaoh became angry with these 2 government officials, and don't think of them as like servants or like a baker and a guy that just pours wine. They were lined up in authority. They were the cupbearer was about the 3rd maybe person in the line of succession because they were very, very important. If they were drinking wine, they could die, or the Pharaoh could die. But some unknown offense cost them their freedom. And remember, these are Semites, so they're also from an Asian, or part of the Asian continent of Semites. The Oriental, I guess, would be a better way to put it. So honor and shame and courtesy and the way you do things is very, very important. So more than likely what happened was they offended some of these sensibilities, so he just threw them in prison, which was really easy back then. You say, put them in a hole, boom, they're gone. They didn't see danger in their dreams. It was that there were no dream interpreters. They didn't know what they meant, so they didn't know how to get that. Now, when you think of, like, we have psychics and mediums and other people and that will interpret your dreams for them. None of those are real, but they're available, and that same thing was true then. When you're in prison, you didn't have access to those, but all of a sudden they found a guy that can do that. That's divine providence. So the headless corpse was impaled on a stake as a warning, basically, hey, you come into this place, you better keep it together, you better act right, or this is what's going to happen to you. But also, one of the values of restoring somebody and executing somebody at the same time is you really send a powerful message that I have the power of life and death. I am supreme being, supreme ruler over this area. That is the way you really rule a country, especially with your top officials. They don't know if they're going to be restored or impaled. Either one could happen any day. That is the danger of being around a dictator. Sometimes they just kind of flip out and kill people. But the baskets on top of the head was the way males carried items in Egypt too. You would have never seen women do that. They put it on their backs and shoulders, but men did it on their heads and then just walked. That was fairly normal thing to see. And then the last sentence is so typical of mankind. They forgot Joseph. He just forgot him. He didn't appreciate him. Now, there's some theory as to whether maybe he didn't want, the guy just got impaled next to me, my coworker basically, and I got my job back. So I'm going to not rock the boat. This is what most people think. I've seen people, the head guy is acting erratically, unbiblically, terribly sometimes, and the one that gets abused is just ostracized and kicked out, and then nobody else stands up because they don't want to be treated the same. But the one that did it knows what he's doing. So maybe he forgot about him. Maybe he chose the cowardly way, as a lot of people do when a senior pastor especially is acting up. There's usually a lot of cowards that surround them that don't tell the truth and don't speak up. But that's another topic for another podcast. The key here is he didn't speak up yet. But when he does, that's going to be divine providence too, because it's going to be at the exact right time. So God bless. That's chapter 40. You've studied 40 chapters of Genesis. Wherever you are, scream out, hallelujah, amen. I did it. I studied the first 40 chapters of Genesis. That's great. Leave a comment. Let me know you've made it this far. You can just put your name, hey, I made it, or gig 'em, or thumbs up, anything to just let me know you're there, you made it this far, and we'll wrap up the last 10 chapters of Genesis. God bless. Love God, love people, and change the world. Take care.